There's no place in the world that screams fallen flag units so much as Galesburg, Illinois. Originally a CB&Q yard before becoming Burlington Northern and later BNSF, this yard is full of trains. Of course it is. It's a yard. What did you expect? However, it's BNSF, so obviously a good portion of the trains in here happen to be rare. Not only is it the biggest yard in their whole system, but it's also the main connector between East and West. Now, I didn't know about this yard at all until like a year ago. I was scrolling through YouTube one day and happened to cross paths with a little video by Southern Plains Railfan about Galesburg. Needless to say, Galesburg had good power, and I decided that it would be worth a visit, even if it would take 4 hours of driving. So I canceled my Train Heritage Museum trip for this year and decided to go for Galesburg instead. That was because of Warbonnets. They had just been put into yard trimmer service. There were a few Dash 9s I knew that worked the yard trimmers around Galesburg, and I wanted to catch them before they disappeared. They were already demoted from mainline service to local service and now yard service. It's only a matter of time before they get dumped into the scrap heap for all eternity. Hopefully one gets preserved. One of the Dash 9 ones. On July 20th, 2024, all 5 of us, yes, there were 5 people going on this trip, packed into my aunt's long, funny station wagon rip-off car and headed on the highway to Galesburg. This is the route we were supposed to take to Galesburg. In the end, we ended up taking a slightly different route, but I don't remember what that was, so I can't show it on a map. We had to get up super early for this trip, because otherwise we would have arrived at Galesburg at like 5 p.m. and wouldn't have any time to go rail fanning today. We found a white chocolate Snickers on our way at Family Express. I thought these were discontinued, and they're like my favorite candy bar. It didn't take us long to end up on the highway. Obviously, we were going to take this to Galesburg. What else would we take? The Amtrak? Well, actually, yes, except my aunt literally hates Amtrak with like a burning passion for some reason. She had a bad experience with them once, and now she refuses to ride on them. So that sucks. Anyways, random Amtrak rant aside, we were driving through rural western Illinois. Wonder what interesting things there are to see there. Oh wait, absolutely nothing. You know, corn and soybeans and the occasional wheat, maybe some barns, I don't know. I didn't bother filming any of that, so the footage you're seeing right now is when we drove through Chicago suburbs on our way to, well, the middle of nowhere. Here you can see the giant quarry in Homewood. Been here a couple times, saw it on the Homewood trip and also every time I go to the dentist. Now we get to see the yard in Homewood and the metro station I was supposed to go to on the Homewood trip. That still sucked. We crossed over this river. I have no idea what river it is. River. There was also this water tower. Yeah, I'm really struggling to find things to say because there's nothing interesting over here.
Airport is
Oh, look, the time. It's 10:44 p.m. It's actually 10:44 a.m. because the clock in this car is wrong. Oh, look, a helicopter. This was like the most interesting thing we saw the whole trip. This right here is the only footage I have from the mid part of the trip. As you can see, it's boring.
Ouch.
Before we knew it, however, we were approaching Galesburg. Here we're passing the sign for Rock Island, and here we're passing the sign for Galesburg. Until finally, we arrived into Galesburg properly.
Alaska Cottage, you know that?
Up ahead.
Oh my goodness, in Galesburg? Yeah.
You see that giant sign over there? That says, "Welcome to Galesburg."
You sure?
Yes.
Okay, I want to make sure I'm in Galesburg now.
Welcome to Galesburg!
348? They've just jumped to 348. What's that? Yeah, with car wash.
There it is.
Okay.
Welcome to Galesburg, boys.
You got it?
Welcome to Galesburg. We made it!
Oh, we're on East Main Street, just so you know, brother.
I have no idea.
Well, it's a Children's Museum.
Here it is, Discovery Depot. I have no idea if this is where we're going or not.
There's Adams Press Metal Group over there.
Oh,
look at that.
There he is!
Get him
Oh,
up,
we
Randy.
made it! Hey, bud!
Galesburg!
Look at there, look at there.
It's the Galesburg Railway Station!
Hey, guy! We made it!
This was our first rail fanning location in Galesburg, the well-known Amtrak station and Discovery Depot. This place is famous for just how much activity there is. They also have a steam locomotive on display, CB&Q 3006. This is what would have been the mainline muscle on this line before diesels came around. Built in 1931, I think, it was given to the museum in 1961. Here you can see a Burlington Route baggage car and a Pullman CB&Q. I think that's just a normal car. And the water tower that says Galesburg on it, because of course. Also at the museum is this CB&Q boxcar with the Everywhere West slogan. Finally, and by finally I mean literally a minute after we arrived, our first train showed up. A BNSF grain train with GEVO number 1 leading, a H2-9 in second, and GEVO number 2 as a DPU. The second train was a BNSF manifest pulling out of the yard, with an ace leading and GEVO number 3 in second. I think this is the only ace I saw up close for the entire trip. While we were waiting for this incredibly slow train to pass, we tried to play a game where we'd guess what the DPU was. Everyone, except my brother, unanimously agreed that it would be a GEVO. He said, you never know, it could be an H1, and then it was an H1. I got way too excited seeing this, and I thought it was 11:13 for a second. But no, it was 11:15. Darn it. Still an H1-9 though, so I'm not complaining. As that train pulled out, another train led by GEVO number 4 pulled into the station. I was really excited because, you know, this is a coal train, and since there was only a single locomotive leading, I knew there had to be a DPU. Maybe it would be a Mac or something, maybe even an executive Mac. And it turned out to only be GEVO number 5. In fact, I didn't see a single Mac on this entire trip. Next up was the Amtrak Southwest Chief, with no special units, but it did have an all pre-charger lash-up. Yay! Anyways, it was led by 2 Phase 5 P42 DCs. As I've said a million times, catch these while you can, folks. They won't be around for as long as you think. As the train stops, we walk up to the front of the platform to get a good view of the 2 engines. The leader is number 135, and in second is 206. Get your good looks at these while you still can. Hopefully, one will be preserved, and hopefully, they'll last long enough for me to catch all the heritage units. Don't understand why Amtrak didn't just make their 50th anniversary units ALC-42s, but whatever. Anyways, after a long wait and a great startup, the Amtrak pulled out of the station with a deafening roar of these 2 ancient, by today's standards, locomotives. After that, I went inside the museum, where you can't take photos for whatever reason. Anyways, they gave me this map of the best rail fanning locations around Galesburg. Thanks, but I kinda already knew all of these. Anyways, yes, I did a copious amount of research before this trip. Also, they did tell me that around this time every day, a Warbonnet comes through with a trimmer movement, so obviously I was very excited for that. However, the lady at the desk did give me an interesting detail, that apparently the Warbonnet is named Nick. I asked her, are you sure it's the engine, not the engineer? And she said, nope, it's the engine. So, that's strange. As soon as I left the Amtrak station, a BNSF manifest pulled out of the yard with GEVO number 6 leading and an H2-9 as the DPU. But after that train passed, we looked down the tracks and there it was. Nick, aka the Warbonnet, aka BNSF 647, aka Let's Go! It pulled out of the yard with a trimmer movement and headed straight through the Amtrak station. Obviously, we were ecstatic over this. When I noticed it, I ran down the platform towards the rest of my family, screaming Warbonnet at the top of my lungs because I didn't want them to miss seeing it. And it was so loud that after the train passed, someone came up to us thinking someone got hurt. So, yeah, not my proudest moment. But I am a foamer, so what do you expect? Bruh, you're kidding. Yep, the trimmer was meeting with another mainline train. As I said, the action at this yard is insane. After pulling really far into the Amtrak station to clear some switches in the main Galesburg yard, 647 ground to a halt and began pushing its train back into the yard. Fun piece of trivia about Nick here, it's the only Warbonnet trimmer in the yard that hasn't, as of yet, had its little plow removed. I don't know why they did this. I'm assuming it makes maintenance or yard work or hump work or something easier, because otherwise they wouldn't do it. However, 647, out of all the Warbonnets that have been assigned to Galesburg Yard, is the only one that has retained its plow. After a long, except it wasn't actually long, it just felt long, wait for us, Nick pushed its train back into the yard fully, and we were able to catch another glimpse of the glorious silver and red, or more pink and white at this point, engine as it entered the yard once again and headed out of view. After a stupidly long wait, because I'm not even kidding, you can see the trains 10 miles away at this location. That other mainline train that was meeting with the trimmer finally pulled through the station. And it wasn't even impressive, with GEVO number 7 leading and GEVO number 8 in second. There wasn't even a DPU. So I decided to do something a little bit unconventional for this train, and instead of filming it, I decided to take photos. I eventually want to switch to having a static tripod camera filming each train, and then taking photos with the second camera instead of a second shot. I just wanted to do this to test and see if I actually like the outcome of that. I still haven't fully decided if that's what I should do. If you have an opinion on it one way or another, let me know. I'm still really on the fence about whether taking photos is a good idea or not. Anyways, the train did have some pretty interesting rolling stock, with Conrail, Burlington Northern, and even South Shore cars sprinkled within. This one definitely originated on NS. After that, it was finally 3 o'clock, which meant we could check into our hotel. So we went to the hotel, and then after that, while everyone rested, me and my dad headed out by ourselves to go down to the other overpass at the end of Galesburg Yard. You know, the famous one that literally has parking on the sides where you can park and stop. Yeah, basically railfan heaven. Anyways, while we were driving there, we ended up at this small yard and spotted another Warbonnet with 2 gondolas sitting deep into it. Luckily, there was a gravel road we could take to get down there. There was also this other train with GEVO number 9 in the lead that was waiting. Also in that little yard area was some MAU equipment. And some more MAU equipment. I have no idea why these are off the rails. Anyways, we made it to the end, and there it was, the glorious Warbonnet number 692. This is also a trimmer unit, like Nick. As you can see, the plow on this one has been removed. However, it still retains most of the other iconic Santa Fe features, like of course the paint scheme and the lower ditch lights. The patch on this side is wearing off, making this look more like an original bonnet than it did 10 years ago. Here's the Santa Fe text. It's really faded. For some reason, 692 has a patch of pretty bright red underneath the number on one side. I have no idea how that managed to happen. Unfortunately, BNSF had to spoil it with these giant, ugly, disgusting remote control equipment stickers slapped all over it, which look horrible. As you can see, I brought out my drone for this because I wanted some aerial shots, and they didn't turn out half bad, I think. Anyways, while we were driving out, that train pulled out, and we got to see the other locomotives on it, which is an H2-9 looking quite crispy in second, and GEVO number 10 in third. When we finally did arrive at the overpass, oh boy. First off, there was a Loram rail grinder, definitely wasn't expecting that. A BNSF snowplow, don't know why that's here. And we looked into the yard and saw this. An H2 GE wide cab doing yard service. That can only mean one thing. This is a B40-8W, and I was so excited for it. There's also 674, otherwise known as the Santa Fe bonnet because of the mismatched door on the side, as well as Nick again and a BNSF Jeep number 2955. Here is GEVO 11 and GEVO 12 leading a manifest, and GEVO 13 and GEVO 14 leading another manifest, which is parked waiting for the main line to clear. At least, it was until it pulled out. However, the diesel shop end of the yard had the real good power, with a GP30 car body GP39 rebuild and two C40-8Ws, number 886 and 883. These two ex-ATSF engines were retired from BNSF God knows how long ago, and are somehow still here, just sitting in the Galesburg yard. They're either being used as a part source or waiting to be sold off for scrap. I'm pretty sure the 883 has been owned by LTEX for a long time now, but just hasn't been transported out of Galesburg Yard. And, just to make things even better, behind them was a GP60B, the B unit of the common GP60 model. This was a special order by the Santa Fe, and this one is one of the few that's been repainted into H4. Also by the shop was GEVO number 15 and an H2-9 undergoing a load test. On the other end of the shops was GEVO number 16 and a lot of other locomotives, including this lash up made of a GP60B, a couple random standard cabs, and a blue bonnet. Remember this, it'll be important later. But before I could think of anything else, holy, the B40-8W is moving. But it was moving away from me. And also, at the end of that grain train we mentioned earlier, was an AC44C6M, looking quite toasty. This is an ex-Warbonnet, one of the few AC44C6M rebuilds BNSF did. As you can see by the giant burn mark across the long hood, the rebuilds weren't necessarily very successful, but they are rare nowadays. Heading back to the diesel shop end of the yard, we see this ungodly epic power move, with two standard cabs, an H1-9, a GEVO, a Cascade Green, and an ancient ex-ATSF Slug, one of the rarest locomotives on BNSF. I knew I had to get down there and catch that eventually, but I had more pressing priorities at the moment. Also in the diesel shop was this Warbonnet. Don't worry, its identity will be revealed later. And no, it's not just a normal Warbonnet, I swear. We also get a slightly better view of the lash up I told you to remember. And then, holy crap, the B40-8W started moving, so I ran across the overpass, ran down like 20 feet, and when I zoomed in... Yep, it was a -9. Now, I'm not an idiot here. I swear I thought it was a B40-8W for good reason. That reason being, I didn't know BNSF was putting H2 yard engines in service. It makes sense when you think about it, though, since, you know, this is the same age as all the others. It's 663. This was originally an ATSF Warbonnet that just happened to be repainted. BNSF putting the engines in yard service based on paint scheme is dumb. They put them in based on age, which makes a lot more sense when you really think about it. Anyways, 2955 also started moving across the yard. At this point, I was starting to run out of things to do over in this section of the yard, as not much activity was happening, and the activity that was happening was with incredibly boring locomotives. .663 came to temporarily cure my boredom as it pulled ahead and stopped right in front of the overpass. Even though this is way less cool than a Warbonnet, H2 is still my favorite BNSF livery, so I'll take it. After it stopped, it didn't take long for it to pull fully under the overpass. Once again, looking down at the locomotive area, we can see a green and white loco I don't recognize, which is strange considering how much of a nerd I am, as well as the power move from earlier, which is split up and parked near the load test area. Also, from over here, we get a slightly better view of the Loram rail grinder. Too bad I didn't get to see this in action or even moving. After that, we got off the overpass and headed down onto Southwest Street. Now, everything was pointing to this road being public. There were entrances from every side, public signs on the side, like stop signs and things, etc. And even the sign next to the parking lot said employee and visitor parking. And there wasn't even a no trespassing sign or anything, at least as far as I know. And so we expected this road to be public. So when we drove down there, we were quite surprised later on to find out that it actually wasn't. We didn't know that until after the trip. So don't try this at home, folks. Anyways, at the locomotive shops, there was this disgusting, horrible, awful H3-9, a CSX SD70 Mac rebuild with the boxcar logo, PRLX 7330, and ex-Norfolk Southern SD70 ACU, part of the half of the fleet that Norfolk Southern stupidly sold off in 2019. Yeah, not their brightest move. Near to the locomotive shops is BNSF 2676, a Jeep, connected to BNSF 1775, an ex-Santa Fe SD40-2. Unsurprisingly, there was a Warbonnet. This is number 669. Just like 692, it's had its front and back plows removed. Here we can see what looks like a freshly repainted SD40-2, number 1948. This one is ex-Burlington Northern. You can tell by the headlight position. Also, there was one of the greatest pinnacle of engineering locomotives. Not really, but I just really like them. The SD60M Triclops. Unfortunately, this one isn't in Cascade Green, but none of them are anymore, so what do you expect? I am just so glad BNSF didn't sell all of them off to CITX back in 2015, because, you know. Anyways, this is number 4616, and it currently wears the H4 paint scheme. That strangely striped mint green engine turned out to be SSRX 669, a GP15-1. As anybody who's ever been to Galesburg knows, this is a spot where a lot of leaser locomotives travel between different railroads or into storage yards, so seeing one here is not surprising. It was also coupled to an H2 GEVO. If people don't know, there are only 94 of these on BNSF, and when you compare that to the amount of fake bonnets, they're actually less common. So, take your photos of these guys while you can. Never thought I'd tell you to be excited over a BNSF GEVO, but, you know, every day something new happens, right? The second, yes, the second most insane locomotive over here was this. BNSF 1670, an XBN Cascade Green SD40-2. This is usually used as a hump switcher. I don't know why it has two patches, it just does. The patch on the long hood is so old that you can see the old number 8019 barely poking through. This is a really nice locomotive. Here you can see it parked next to its modern replacement, GEVO number 18. But behind it was the real prize, an ex-ATSF H1 painted slug. I don't even know how many of these were made, let alone how many are still on BNSF's roster. Not very many were repainted into H1 as they were retired so early into BNSF's existence. And as a result, most of them are still Blue Bonnet if they exist at all. Of course, most of them don't. I only am aware of two that exist. One is in storage in Topeka, and the other is this one, the 3695. I have no idea what's next for this unit. Considering it's coupled to a hump engine, you'd think, well, maybe they're using it for hump service. But I doubt that BNSF would use this ancient of a locomotive for anything. I mean, I know they have low standards when it comes to hump service, but this is stretching it a little. My best guess is that it was just in the deadline in Galesburg, and it's moving to this yard area to be either sent on a train for scrap or sold off to another railroad. Probably the former. Just outside the shop doors, we can see BNSF 3178, another Jeep, and BNSF 990, an H1-9 with some graffiti on the long hood. Then we get to see 663 once again pulling ahead out of the yard. Interestingly, from the side view looking through the windows, you can actually see that there is a crew member inside this locomotive. I always thought the trimmers were remotely operated, but I guess not. We then decided to leave Southwest Street and head to the second overpass on the Galesburg map. So we headed up to the north end of the yard, and there it was, the second overpass, right in front of the Y. As we drove over, we spotted a few trains. One was already halfway through passing underneath the overpass. One was an H1-9 and CSX GEVO. Those guys will be important later. And then we caught a glimpse of this BNSF grainer with not one, but two fake bonnets in the lead. We climbed our way back up onto the overpass and were immediately disappointed when we realized that these two weren't going anywhere. They were tied down in the yard. Even worse, these were the early production BNSF Warbonnets that still said Santa Fe on the nose and BNSF on the long hood. And the trailing one even had its silver alternator box intact. This would have been a great train to see moving, but man, I'm just glad I saw it at all. It even got on grab bag. Anyways, there was also GEVO number 19 and an H2-9 moving under the overpass. They were switching onto a different line to pick up their train. Now we get a better view of the H1 and CSX GEVO number 20. Nice. These two I also saw later on the VRF cam. Anyways, later that night we decided to go out again. Yeah, I know. We were gonna go in the pool at the hotel, but it was absolutely frigid, so we decided not to. And there isn't really anything else to do in Galesburg, so rail fanning. We arrived back at the Amtrak station from the other side. We got a picture of this Lincoln statue and Amtrak. I thought the statue was going to be of Carl Sandberg, because if you know anything about Galesburg or have ever visited, you know that the only two things they care about are Carl Sandberg and trains. And speaking of trains, the first train we saw was a BNSF manifest with GEVO leading an H2-9 in second. Interestingly, the H2-9 has had its alternator box swapped out with one from a fake Bonnet. Anyways, just like earlier, I decided to do my film with tripod and take photos with phone idea for these trains, specifically because it was night and I knew that the video wouldn't turn out very well. Then, the signal changed to this aspect, which is a special one on BNSF. It's flashing red under solid red, which could only mean one thing. An M train was coming. M trains usually have great power on them, and this one was no exception. Led by a GEVO, trailing was an H3-9, third was a GEVO, and fourth was an H2-9. Wow! This is the greatest lash up I've ever seen. No sarcasm at all whatsoever. This was an amazing train. 10 out of 10. We were then planning to leave, but of course we couldn't do that because 674 pulled out of the yard with a trimmer movement. We hadn't seen Santa Fe up close yet, so we knew we had to wait for it to reverse back and get a better shot. This was the only rolling meat I got while at the Amtrak station. After the GEVO number 23 and 24 on the incredibly long Bean Sniff Manifest rolled by, with narration courtesy of Pass Me,
And 7,428 years later, the last car of the thick manifest finally passed by. This is very exhausting.
the Bonnet movement began to reverse back into the yard once again. I took the opportunity while it was reversing, because we knew it was going to take a long time to arrive, to get some night shots of the 3006. This locomotive really does look good, especially at night. Someone with deep, deep pockets has got to come and restore this thing one day, or at least one of the other engines of its class, maybe even the 3009 at the IRM. These are great, and you have no idea how much I would want to see one of these barreling through the Amtrak station at full speed. Anyways, after all of that steam locomotive stuff, the Bonnet finally passed by, giving us a great nighttime shot. Now, we would have gone back to the hotel there, but we had spent so long waiting for the Bonnet to come back into the yard that the Amtrak train named, get this, the Carl Sandberg, was only like 2 minutes away, so we decided, why not catch this one too? The train was led by a Charger, because of course it was. Why wouldn't it be? This is Amtrak in 2024 on an Amtrak Chicago area Midwest train. There is no reason why this train should be led by anything other than a Charger. Nope, this isn't a Charger, folks. This is a GE P32-8 BWH. The passenger variant of the B40-8W. To say I was ecstatic when this thing rolled into the station is an understatement times 2. I was freaking out and foaming behind the camera when this thing pulled in. This is 518, one of the engines that normally does the switching work around Chicago. It must have been put on this train because the Charger failed or something. Anyways, after screaming at the top of my lungs, not really, and foaming this after this thing pulled into the station, about 3 minutes later, it departed. And don't think I'm not going to notice the random Northeast Regional Am fleet right behind the engine. After the Amtrak departed, we decided to call it a day. But we took a route around the Amtrak station so I could get a picture of this Burlington route caboose, which I forgot to do earlier. Anyways, the next day, we got up at the hotel and headed back to the first overpass. The idea was that we were going to see if the two Warbonnets were still there, and if they were, we could catch them.
Train to end the yard. Or something.
When we passed underneath another, completely unrelated to the other two, overpass, there was this BNSF Z train stopped underneath it, with the end right in front. We even got to pass underneath the Amtrak station on our way to the overpass. And when we finally did arrive, as expected, the 2 BNSF Warbonnets were absent. And instead, there was 2 more trains, one led by a GEVO and H2-9, and the other led by an ACE. Now, knowing that there wouldn't be anything here, we decided to head all the way down to the other overpass. On the way, we caught a glimpse of this car just sitting in the middle of nowhere, and checked back up on that spot where 692 was sitting yesterday. It was still there, but there wasn't any signs of any other locomotives. Soon enough, we were approaching the other overpass. We took a look into the diesel shop while we were driving and saw plenty of locomotives stopped there. When we finally made it up onto the overpass, somehow, the CSX GEVO and BNSF H1-9 were sitting there, along with a, for real this time, I'm not joking, B40-8W. These are one of the rarest locomotives on BNSF, with them being retired as we speak. But that wasn't even the best part, because 551 here wasn't the only B40-8W, because there was also 552. Yeah, remember that Warbonnet that was stopped in the shops yesterday? Yep, it was 552. One of the only remaining ATSF painted B40-8Ws. There's only 3 of these in service, and 552 is unique as it's had its long hood restored by vandals. Quite interesting. Over on the switching end of the yard, we see Nick and 663 are still there, along with 674, which is off in the distance doing some yard work. We catch a glimpse of the 1670 and Slug once again, leading another massive power move, with one more standard cab and GEVOs number 29, 30, 31, and 34, and 35. We then headed down Southwest Street once again, where we caught another glimpse of the 2 C40-8Ws before a white BNSF marked van started following us. This was the point when we realized we probably shouldn't be down here, so we decided to not get out of the car and drive down the road in the opposite direction that the van was going, in hopes of getting out of the yard before we got arrested or fined or something. I did manage to snap a few photos and videos on the way out, starting with this pair of CN SD70M-2s, 8012 and 8895. The 8012 is actually a Thunder cab. I was expecting to see a BNSF one, but didn't think in any way I'd see a CN one. Here's a better view of that BNSF snowplow we saw previously, and a Siemens electrical generator on a flatbed. Here we see GEVO number 36 and an H2-9, and just like the other one, it's had its alternator box swapped out, except this one came from a CN engine. Have no idea how that happened. As we approach the hump, we get a rare view of one of BNSF's hump sets, led by 675, another ex-ATSF Warbonnet that was repainted into H2 with a Warbonnet alternator box, BNSF 302, an ex-Burlington Northern Cascade Green SD40-2 that got in a wreck and was rebuilt into a cabless B unit, and another BNSF locomotive, a SD60M, except this time without the Triclops cab. After escaping Southwest Street, we saw a rainbow on our way out and headed back up onto the overpass. We also passed by these line of cars with hundreds and hundreds of railroad ties sitting behind them. Once we made it back up on the overpass, oh hey look, the lash up I told you to remember is moving again. Wonder where it might be headed. Anyways, so is 663, so I took the opportunity to film it. This is when I found out that these engines are actually crewed. We saw the crew departing and readying the engine for remote operation. Meanwhile, 674, aka Santa Fe, was pulling out of the yard on a trimmer movement. I was super excited to have a Warbonnet pass directly under me. And even better, 663 started up again, giving me a double trimmer moment. As 664 approached, we realized we weren't going to get it passing under us, because it stopped right in front of us, which led to an epic shot of it and 663 reversing back into the yard at the same time. This shot is the pinnacle of you versus the guy they told you not to worry about. Then, on the other side of the yard, I noticed BNSF 686 was sitting there. 686 is a special ATSF Warbonnet because the little yellow band on the front is just gone. I don't know what happened to it. Anyways, looking back over the bridge, 674 is making a brief movement next to Nick. I like to call this shot, wait, what year is it again? Anyways, while I was filming that, I noticed that the lash up I told you to remember was at the other end of the yard, and barreling down the line towards the Y. We now knew we were running short on time to catch the lash up I told you to remember. So, we rushed down from the one overpass to the other overpass in an attempt to try and catch it. And I'll just let the footage speak for itself in this part. See, that, folks, is called ruining your hopes and dreams. Well, at least I got a good shot of the 334 GP60B as the train backed up onto the other side of the Y. Even the shot of the blue bonnet looks pretty fine from here. The train stopped at the end of the Y and waited for clearance to head out onto the main line through the Amtrak station. The blue bonnet here is 169, famous for working in LA, as you can tell by the graffiti on the long hood, and the GP60B 334 as mentioned earlier. The train backed up a little bit more to clear some switches, got its clearance, and finally headed back slinking across the other side of the Y and through the Amtrak station, far into the distance. Just as it got out of view, a BNSF local showed up with a long hood forward Jeep for power. It moved a little bit more before it eventually had to stop and wait for clearance underneath the bridge. But then, I had a revelation. Hold up, why was the lash up I told you to remember even going this way? It's heading onto the main line, where local freights don't usually operate. And if it was going to pick up an M train or something, then it would need to go into the yard first, and it wasn't pulling any cars at this moment. That's when I realized that this set of power was here because it was turning around on the Y. And sure enough, when I looked back at the Amtrak station, I saw the headlights and the lash up I told you to remember was heading back in my direction. I got in position, ready to catch it heading under the bridge, before I was jump scared by 674 with another trimmer movement. And then, as if this three-way meet couldn't get any crazier, a set of Gevos made up of Gevo number 37 and Gevo 38 pulled out of the yard and parked right next to the lash up I told you to remember, which at this point had stopped waiting for its clearance. I took this opportunity to take some photos. Seeing either a Warbonnet or Bluebonnet in 2024 is rare, but both at the same time, well, that's incredibly rare. And while I was waiting, the Amtrak Carl Sandberg appeared once again, still with 518 at the head, turning this four-way meet into a five-way meet. And just as I was done marveling over that, the BNSF local with long hood forward Jeep got its clearance and pulled into the yard. As soon as the local cleared, 674 was given permission to move again. It roared into life and pulled its long trimmer movement around the S-bend and into the distance. The trimmer movement didn't stop, but our attention was diverted elsewhere as we heard the roar of 4 EMD prime movers and we knew exactly what was happening. I quickly turned the camera and there it was. The lash up I told you to remember, with BNSF Jeep leading, Blue Bonnet GP60 169 in second, SD40-2 in third, and H1 GP60B 334 in last, roared into life and headed directly under the overpass, giving me a crystal clear shot of them. The lash up I told you to remember slunk its way into the yard, and we didn't see it again for the rest of the day. Looking back over the bridge, that pair of Gevos was heading back into the yard to do something I don't know. Yes, I know the shot's blurry, but they're Gevos, so literally no one cares. Meanwhile, we get a view of this lash up with Gevo number 39 and H2-9. Before the trimmer movement with 674 started to reverse again. By this point I really had to go to the bathroom, but I decided that it would be worth it to sit here and wait for 674 to pass directly underneath me. Because Warbonnet. Yay. So after what felt like 67.8 years, the Warbonnet finally started moving backwards again. Before it stopped. I was quite excited, but mostly fed up, when the train started to move again. And then it stopped again. Meanwhile, a BNSF grainer with H1-9 leading and Gevo number 40 in trail passed by, and Gevo number 41 was on the other side of the overpass doing some yards work. Meanwhile, that previously mentioned manifest pulled ahead and passed by the Warbonnet on its way to the main line. And after what felt like eons of waiting, despite the fact it was literally 9 minutes, the Warbonnet finally completed its trimmer movement and headed back underneath the overpass where I was able to catch it from a top-down view. Notice how burnt the panels on the top are. That's a GE for you. The Warbonnet stopped on the other side of the bridge. I took the opportunity to get a nice photo. Meanwhile, 663 was still doing trimmer work, but I didn't really want to film it as I had other things to do. We were done with stuff there, and also I went to the bathroom because, I kind of have to do that. But we headed over to our last major location for the trip, the deadline. This is where locomotives BNSF isn't currently using are stored. Now, I didn't know the actual proper way to get over here, so all I have are bad faraway shots. Anyways, at the very beginning of the deadline is BNSF 524 and H3B40-8W. Behind that is 1965 and H1 SD40-2. Behind that is 2369 and H1 Jeep. Then there's the 2902 and H4 Jeep. Behind that is the incredibly rare BNSF 1659, an ex-Santa Fe GP9R, built all the way back in the 1950s and still wearing blue bonnet. This is, to my knowledge, the oldest freight locomotive currently on an active roster of a Class 1 railroad. Of course, it's laid up in the deadline, but it's technically still on the roster. Behind that is BNSF 2034, another H4 Jeep. And then even further in the deadline is LTEX/GN number 23, an ex-ATSF Blue Bonnet GP30 that's currently owned by LTEX and will probably be heading east soon to Lordstown, Ohio for scrap/storage. I wanted to get my drone out to get some better shots, but unfortunately I couldn't get close enough to the trains for the drone's range to reach them because of the weeds. After that pretty big failure at the deadline, we decided to go back to the Amtrak station for one last time. We decided to pass over the overpass on our way just to make sure that nothing had happened and so we could look for the lash-up I told you to remember. As expected, it wasn't there, so we headed back to the Amtrak station to catch our final two trains. then, just as we pulled in, Nick pulled out with his trimmer movement for that morning. Darn it. It was fine, we thought. He'll come back, we thought. I decided to take a time lapse of the full trimmer movement reversing back into the yard, and then just forgot to switch it to normal video. Bruh. So after that massive failure, which wasn't really a massive failure because we had already seen so many Warbonnets at this point, a charger pulled in, pulling that day's Carl Sandberg train. The middle one. There's 3 each day. This time, yeah, it was really a charger. No P32-8s in sight. Interestingly, the Northeast Regional coach was still here right behind the engine. Probably won't see one of these ever again, so I decided to take a photo. The Charger here is one of the SC44 variants, the worst looking version of the Charger, in the worst paint scheme Amtrak has ever created. I hate these locomotives with a burning passion. And apparently birds do too, because this one, yeah. I feel bad for it, but how did this even happen? Anyways, after not nearly as long of waiting, the Charger pulled out of the station, and that was the last train we saw on the whole trip. On our way out, we snapped a few more photos, including this one of the depot with the Burlington Northern caboose, and this one of the little car they used to transport people's baggage onto the Amtrak. Here's a really old car painted in gold. Somehow, the journey back managed to be even more dull than the way there. We decided to play the license plate game, which is, if you don't know, a game where you try to get every single state's license plate. We got most of them, except West Virginia. West Virginia still sucks. Anyways, as you can see in this photo, the car was absolutely trashed by the time we got home. Not surprising considering we had to eat lunch and dinner in here. Anyways, on the way out, we also stopped in an antique store and I managed to pick up this Galesburg Railroad Days keychain, so that was nice. But when I got home, the trip was over. Overall, this was a massively successful trip, and I enjoyed it far more than the IRM and Steamtown trips from the last 2 years. I'll definitely be returning to Galesburg eventually. Maybe I'll actually get a decent shot of the deadline and see the Smurf, because, that was like the main reason I wanted to come here. You should know that if you watch the Bensonville video. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed, and make sure to come back next time for another vlog just like this one.
I'm full of surprises.
Are you singing, Diesel?
They ought to say of me, I bring some razzle-dazzle to the yard. I'm full of surprises. As you can plainly see, I don't find being surprising all that hard.
I can't really see anything under here.
I'm full of surprises, they ought to say of me, I bring some razzle-dazzle to the yard. I'm full of surprises, as you can plainly see, I don't find being surprising all that hard. Some would probably say I'm only up to my old tricks, but I'd say I'm a problem solver, looking for a nice quick fix. I'm full of surprises, they ought to say of me. I bring some razzle-dazzle to the rail. I'm full of surprises, as you can plainly see. I'm trusting my surprises to prevail. I hope this time being surprising doesn't fail. They used to call me devious because I had a bit of previous.
Guys, someone will know.
But please, you must believe us, I'm not that bad. Well, maybe just a taste.
Doopy-doopy-doo. I have to wait a million years to record a line. So all these lines are actually the same line, but I had to keep cutting between the different parts because I'm too lazy to wait 8 years, or more like 8 seconds for each individual clip because I'm lazy and have a super tiny, minuscule attention span. Help me.
Onions have layers or something.
We're going insane.
Double trimmer moment. Double trimmer moment. It's a double trimmer moment. Double trimmer moment. There's 663 and 664, and this song is cringe as heck. But I don't care because I'm bored and need something to keep myself entertained. Oh yeah. 664 and 674. Lame as heck. Locomotives are wait. No, they're actually not. Who cares? I'm just singing this song because I'm extremely bored. Oh yeah, it's 674 and 663. They want to kick me out of their yard. Actually, they don't, but that one guy definitely does.